Here.
Knowles,
Here.
Lambert,
Here.
White,
Here.
and Williams.
Here.
The pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Approval of minutes. Is there a motion to accept the minutes of the March 4th, 2021 board meeting?
Second.
It's moved by Katrina, seconded by Heather. To accept the minutes of the March 4th, 2021 board meeting. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None. Abstain? Citizens input. This is the time in the meeting if anyone in the audience would like to stand up and address the board. All right. Old business, school construction project update. Building committee will review progress to date and make a recommendation for the next steps in the school construction process.
I move to authorize to direct the school, correction, let me start. I move to authorize and direct the building committee to proceed with consolidated school construction projects options.
I'll second that.
It has been moved by Terry and seconded by Stu to authorize and direct the building committee to proceed with the consolidated school construction project options. Any discussions?
Can we hear from the building committee on the process and why this is the recommended path?
I have been asked by the building committee to speak on behalf of this motion in a positive manner. And what I'm going to do is talk basically about the facilities themselves, the school, and then I'm going to ask Stuart to follow with the second component of this, which is the options that are available to education due to that. And what I'm trying to say is this is a two-part, major parts that I think we have to consider. One being the facility itself and the educational component of it. I will speak basically of the opportunities of the facility itself. Moving forward, the building committee will look at educational specification and what a new or renovated school best fits our needs. As we move forward, the major consideration for the school facility are, and now I'm speaking just of the facilities, you've heard a lot about the assessments that we've had done by CHA Architectural. All of those recommendations point to new facility rather than renovation. And also the other component of that is that a major consideration as we go forward is that any facility upgrades of existing facilities probably would be on the local tax rate rather than state subsidy. So we really need to look at that part of the equation very strongly. Normally, it might be easier. You might say you renovate an existing facilities, and quite frankly, I agree, and that's how personally I started out looking at this whole project. But with the fact that we have an assessment done by an architectural firm that recommends that basically their final recommendation of was that neither of these facilities or any of the facilities we're talking about, which is Fairfield, obviously Albion, and obviously Clinton, that we not look at those, and even if we did use their figures for renovation, that renovation does not include anything but the basically bringing it into compliance with codes and whatnot. It doesn't fix the roof that might leak next year, that sort of thing. Maine Department of Ed is unlikely to support renovations anyways, as I stated before. Let's talk about a new facility for a minute here, in that a new facility would make improvements in the building climate for education and promote equality in the areas of education, and the physical space that everybody in the district would be occupying would be a much upgraded 21st century, other than we have the haves and the have-nots almost in the district. The things that would promote this equality in a new building, and these are also things that as we go forward we need to look at. First of all, they would comply with all the new current building codes, and they have changed since some of these schools were built and remodeled. It would provide for future expansion. Any new construction we would look at has to provide in the design features, and what we look at has to look at the feature. Again, one of those things that probably wasn't done in the past. We need to, or it would cut operational costs, there's no doubt about that, due to improvements in building envelope, insulation, modern construction techniques and whatnot. Safety, both at the building site and the building itself, would be much greater. And safety in the building site, obviously bus offloading thing, areas, the traffic patterns within the schools would be much improved. As you know, currently Clinton, is basically the back off onto the parking space right into the road. We know what Fairfield Primary looks like down here. So I think site safety is a big consideration, and obviously building safety with modern sprinkler systems and all the things that requires. Security and access. A couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, that seemed to be a big thing nationally with security because of the school shootings and that sort of thing. And any new design would have all that security, or a new building would have that security and access parts of the building already in consideration. Structurally, big change in structure would be, now the schools have to be built to wind and earthquake standards. Obviously, earthquake standards for this area aren't too high, but at least they have to be considered. State-of-the-art mechanical. I think we've all been around and things have changed a lot mechanically as far as buildings in the last 30 years. Heating system, solar, ventilation is the real big one. Those standards changed just after COVID-19 hit, and we're struggling with other buildings right now. And as a matter of fact, we've got buildings that the only way we can really comply is with portable classroom type ventilation now. And another feature that seems to be something really different, the schools have to be built internally so they're flexible. And what we mean by that is interior walls are movable, different structures internally basically are that you look at the future and what the future might hold. Physical accommodations for programs within the community, I think, is another big change new schools look at, or the state looks at. Curious things like we talked about clinics and libraries and that sort of thing, all being open to the public. Another big change in how the building would be designed and built. This kind of concludes my remarks, and I know Stuart wants to speak to the educational opportunity part of this. And these two major categories go together, and that's why we kind of wanted to let everybody know, the board know, what those opportunities might look like also. So I guess I'll turn it back to the board chair, and she can turn it over to Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. I think Neil and I are the only two members of the original facilities committee that date back to 2011, 2012, when the original assessment of the schools in SAD 49 was made. We, at that time, looked at each school, number of trips to the school. We hired both architects and engineers to review the findings, and they did a report back then. And the conclusion of the group at that time was that the ideal remedy would be to apply to the state. Unfortunately, the state didn't start accepting new applications until 2017, so we were kind of sitting on our hands for about 5-6 years waiting to see what would happen. The rest is history. As you know, Fairfield Primary, a 100-year-old school, was put at the top of the state's list for replacement. However, a couple of things that I want to point out, and this goes back to when I was first on the school board in 1990. Two things. One, SAD 49 is a relatively poor district. Schools at the local level get financed from the property tax, and on a per student basis, we do not have a lot of property valuation there. And this is reflected, Jenny could do this much better than I could, but historically the state has picked up roughly under the school funding formula 2/3 of the cost of our education, and local picks up 1/3. That is based on our ability to pay. The school funding formula is slightly out of whack where it was back 40 years ago. It's got some inconsistencies in it, and consequently, we have to tax ourselves a little higher than we did when the funding formula originally came in. The other thing that I bumped into in 1990, this is the time that the state got into the business of giving schools rank cards, districts rank cards. We had a whole series of educational governors. I don't know what their claim to fame was, other than they claimed to be education governors. The bad news about the educational assessments and the report cards at that time is that SAD 49 ranked at the bottom of the heap statewide. I think we were about 5th from the bottom in terms of academic performance. And this is not an ideal place to be. It gives the school system a bad reputation. It also indicates that we probably weren't meeting the needs of the students at that time. Subsequent to that, when we started looking at it, we found that our lower tier of students, in terms of performance, was a larger group than what you would normally expect it to be under a normal distribution curve. And the rest is sort of history. We instituted a number of programs, reading recovery, math intervention, literacy, and the like, and lo and behold, the performance of the district started to get better and better. And I think it was about 2 years ago that Superintendent Harrison reported to the board that our SATs, which had always been lagging, were up to comparable with other schools in the area. Am I correct on this?
That's correct.
Quite a gain. I can't resist throwing this in because I think people need to be aware of it. Then we had an interim superintendent who lasted about 10 months until the board fired him. And he didn't think any of these programs were necessary. He spent a lot of time dismantling them. And I think it is going to take considerable time to get back. What does this have to do with school buildings? Albion and Clinton are both 70 years old. Primary is 100. If you think back, there was no special ed when these schools were built, no special services. Probably, maybe they had a hot lunch program, but very likely that they did not. I think it is fascinating fact that Clinton's gymnasium was built in 1974, and Albion's gymnasium was built in 1979. They didn't come along until the school was already 40, 50 years old. Obviously, we didn't have to deal with issues of security then. Terry has already spoken about ventilation systems. I happened to teach in school back, it was constructed in 1966. And at that time, fuel oil was 8 cents a gallon, and the whole ventilation school system for the school system was that they ran the boiler full blast, and you could open up as many windows in your classroom as you wanted to. So we had genuine fresh air ventilation, even then when I can remember having 2 windows open when it was below zero and the wind was blowing. I don't think we could afford to do that now. Probably most noteworthy, and if you look at the diagrams of the schools, these schools lack a lot of things in terms of teaching needs. A school is not designed for special ed, is not going to meet the needs of the special ed students and the special ed teachers. The technology, it's an afterthought when you add it to schools that are this old. I have seen more special ed teachers teaching janitors' closets than I care to count. It's not a good situation. If you go to see some of the new schools in the state, they are constructed for the needs of the school in 2021. Quite a difference. I think we owe it to the students to give them the programs that they need in facilities that that are configured for their needs. Certainly we owe it to the teachers. Teachers really are challenged when they have to work in a substandard building, and Albion, Clinton, and Fairfield Primary this. I can't get by Fairfield Primary mentioning there's so much asbestos in the building. Now, it's all self-contained. It's not a problem, except that nobody is allowed to even put a thumbtack in the wall. And it's been that way for a number of years. I think that to meet the needs of the district and its students, its teachers, and its citizens, I think the only solution is to replace and consolidate the current schools. It's important that one final comment. I mentioned the reading, recovery, and math intervention. Somewhere in the past 40 or 50 years, style of teaching changed. At one time, I think, and this was back when I was teaching, the attitude sort of was, it was the teacher's job to lay the materials out, and it was up to the student to figure it out. That, fortunately, we have evolved beyond that now, to where the school takes the responsibility. If a student is deficient, is falling behind, then there is an intervention, such as reading recovery, math, tutoring, and the like, to get the student back up to speed. A student that can't read by third or fourth grade, unless they get some assistance, they're probably not going to be much of a reader when they get into high school. And we need to construct buildings that are designed to accommodate these needs and deal with the individualities of the students. Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So, I appreciate what you're saying about the access to reading recovery and math intervention in particular. If we were to consolidate the three schools into one facility, would students have better access to those services than they do now? Maybe that's a Mrs. Hurston's question. Do students at each of the elementary schools and the primary school have access to those services 5 days a week currently?
With reading recovery, yes, but the district has already moved a few academic years back to consolidate some of the services that are in place, and they are seated at Benton Elementary School, particularly some of the special education programming are district-wide seated in that building through grade 6. And some of the other services, speculating, whatever the project turns out to be, one of the questions of equity that we hope to address with that is offering a true universal pre-K. And so right now, at each of the schools, there are a limited number of slots available to our families. We contract through KDCAP, that is also a Head Start agency, but they're not near enough to account for the possibility of what you would see maybe similar to a kindergarten enrollment. So those are a couple of situations where there's not necessarily equity in programming.
Thank you. That was the word I wasn't using correctly that I wanted to get to. Would this create more equity among the educational opportunities for the elementary age students?
Certainly for those programs we just mentioned, yes.
Does anyone else have a question?
I Just a comment, I know Roberta wants to review what we had done thus far in the process, and since she was supposed to go before me, I apologize.
That's quite all right. Very good. So,
Thank you, and I apologize for the very small font here. So this is just a prelude that was offered for our most recent public forum event. So the building committee has been dedicating our time and effort to community engagement. That is where we're at right now, and hoping to move beyond that. And Stu has filled in some of the history of this, and actually decisions made by the school board many years ago, and it began with that building study commissioned by the group, and again, Stu and I think Neil are the two members who were part of that, and the district hired Oak Point to do the structural survey of Fairfield Primary, Alvin Elementary, and Clinton Elementary. And that study was again updated in 2016. And as Stu mentioned, in March 2017, those project applications were filed. The district submitted 3 applications for the schools I just mentioned for the replacement of each of those schools. That was the intention of submitting those applications. And a point to note, and we've talked about this in some of our forum events, and certainly with the architects, and I've spoken with Scott Brown from the Department of Ed, and I've also spoken with Bill Stockmeyer from Woodson about the process in this thing called rating cycle. And the frequency of that is really relying on the bond capacity of the state. So prior to 2017, the last rating cycle that was open was 2010-2011. And I do not recall how many, similar to the 74 that were on the list in our rating cycle, but the state at that time funded down through school or project number 16. And of those first 16 identified, some of them, probably several of them, included consolidation in the school unit for schools in that system that were lower down on the list. So the state works very hard to solve the more global concern for the school unit. But number 17 in the next rating cycle on that list of 2010-2011 did not necessarily end up number 1 on the cycle that we're in. I think it ended up at number 9. And when we were notified, the state had identified 3 projects. Was Fairfield Primary School is number 1. I think North Elementary in Skowhegan, and Rumford Elementary School. And that was it. And as of, I think, last fall, 2 other projects were added to that. So of this cycle of 74 ranked, the state's only looking to fund 5 right now. You know, and that may change, but as someone asked at the Benton Forum, you know, concern about the more broadly the state economy and the state's capacity and the department's capacity to fund projects. So sitting at number 1 is a really good place to be, and I don't want to speculate out how many the state will end up adding in this cycle, but I'm glad where we're at. So the school board, as of last year, went ahead and with the initial step of hiring last March CHA after a subcommittee of, I think, 4 board members, 1 from each of our communities, conducted the RFQ process, took the applications, interviewed the firms, but prior to that visited site projects around here. I think we went as far as
we went to Eastbourne, thank you for that. But we looked at what is out there for current projects, and aside from associating that with what the capacity of the firm is, just it was very eye-opening as far as what's possible in state-funded school projects. So this past December, CHA presented their findings from their feasibility study to this school board, and CHA recommended that the district no longer uses Fairfield Primary, Albion Elementary, or Clinton Elementary for educational purposes. And they, as I said, stated that in a public forum. Shortly after that, the board appointed a building committee and charged us with the responsibility of these initial steps of public engagement. And that has been our work thus far. As I said, we've conducted 7 forums. One of them was a fully remote one. We initially began with 2 that were scheduled in January and went back. The firm and I met with Scott Brown and his team and talked further about how we might go about engaging more of the public and sorting out which is low attendance based on a pandemic. I think that's reasonable, and the firm did say that the participation was lower, but also considering the health environment we're in. We did widely advertise. We have published a survey out online. We sent bulk mailing out to every household in the community. We had advertised in the Sentinel of the January forum events. They are all posted up on our website. They've been recorded digitally, of course. We have an email dedicated for questions related to school construction. It's in a prominent place if you're seeking that information on the banner page of our website. And that is our work to date thus far. I wanted to share some of the information put together, again, just distilling down CHA's report. This fact sheet was the basis of our discussion, and that we have weighed in formulating our recommendation to the board, all the information we have. And of course, the applications were about facilities, our aging facilities, and are they suitable for the purposes of educating our children. And that would be programming, and it would also include life safety and the health environment in the school district right now. And thank you, Terry, you did a great job of summarizing all that. And this information will be published up on our site as well. So there's the history of the applications: primary community at 1, Clinton at 39, and Albion number 58 of the 74. And then just the building statistics, the building age, as has been discussed here this evening, and some of the limitations of them. Well, the square footage, but the lot size, and Terry alluded to that for site circulation is a concern. The building is on Fairfield Primary on a plot of 1.42 acres with very little parking in a pretty busy street block, I guess, and people often have to park across the street to bring their children into the building. There's one example. Right now, when schools go up, new school construction, they're looking for a 20-acre parcel with an additional acre for each 100 students enrolled in the building, so they can accommodate site circulation issues and separating out. If any parent has been to, say, Benton at dismissal, where we have buses routed through, and parents coming through at the same time, it's a lot to coordinate. And even with the Benton school, you're limited by the real estate that the building is seated on. So that is a concern. looking at whether the buildings have sprinkler systems. Yes, but the annex is not sprinkled, and that's a room, building that we use for other educational purposes. The ADA compliance is an issue in all of these buildings named mechanical ventilation. We were talking about this earlier in our finance and facilities meeting, and I'm going to talk about it later in my report. But we're looking to use federal funds to upgrade ventilation in this Lawrence complex in Benton because there's mechanical ventilation in place. There is none existing in any of the three buildings that were submitted for replacement application. Albion, some similar information in age. Still a pretty small lot, 5.93 acres, no sprinkler system. There are deficiencies in ADA and mechanical. And some of the other systems in place are at lifespan, as the report summarizes, and also the application submitted back in 2017. Summary of Benton Elementary School, so the building age at 30 is for the addition around the main structure, which is, I think, the cafeteria is what it's referred to, adjacent to the gymnasium. There are some ADA deficiencies, but it's sprinkled. There is some mechanical ventilation that we're able to upgrade. Clinton Elementary School. And again, this will be all up on the site, but it's 80 years old, with the newest edition being 30 years old. Poor site circulation, and so forth. The other piece that I think is important to understand, so given the frequency or lack of frequency, which the state cycles up these grading cycles, we're in a good position now to perhaps solve some of our aging facility problems, but also understanding all of our buildings are older. And the junior high, 45 years old, with a shop addition 36 years ago. And the high school, 61 years old. And knowing, and again, as we discussed earlier in committee, I characterize the failure of the sewer lines as catastrophic. The building was inoperable. And we did not have the resources to make those repairs. We didn't have budgeted resources to make those repairs. We had a very limited contingency, and our capital improvement really is related to just general maintenance, and some of that is deferred. We don't usually have many projects in the queue, and in the last couple of budget cycles, those were the areas that we targeted for deferment for the sake of preserving positions and personnel. But our facilities are older, and in a moment I've learned that we could be in a situation where, fortunately, we put that project into one of our grant applications, federal money, and we were able to cover the cost of it. It's approaching $250,000. So that is something also to bear in mind as far as the viability of this school district, that we're fiscally sound and able to maintain the buildings that house the children and the programming and our staff. And there's, we've talked about educational suitability, like students covered that, Terry, but the special services, special education, talked about early learning and the potential for a universal pre-K, intervention programs, our capacity to offer STEM programs for students, also take a facility to house that programming. Wonderful people to deliver the services, and our staff work very hard and are very creative, and make great use of the space and the resources they have. But it would be better if they didn't have those struggles and they had that resource that they needed. Also, state subsidy in our staffing, that in our 279 through grade 6, we have a 1:16 ratio that we subsidize for. This district, part of the local, in addition to the local share prescribed by the state, is we staff under that ratio. We account for class sizes that in some cases are smaller than what the state will subsidize, and that is locally born. And that's just, it's a local decision, but important to know. Another thing that CHA did for us is give an example project of cost and impact, some other school district. And it appears it was a $43 million project with a local-only portion of $730,000. And local only, and talking about that, and it often happens, and probably more likely, the cost of a local portion it tends to be higher for secondary and high schools because of all the peripheral athletic complexes and such. But there are decisions that will be made in the construction project and the design concept where the community will weigh on what they want above and beyond what the state will subsidize. The state will subsidize a certain amount of square footage per age range, for population, and I believe the classroom sizes are getting bigger as far as the real estate, but also accommodating any programming that we have in existence now. The state will subsidize a project that includes that programming and housing for it. But there are other pieces that locally we make decisions on, and one of the next steps looking ahead would be site selection. So there's a whole set of criteria that the department has for site selection. That circulation capacity is one. There's a minimum number of acres parcel that you would put a building on. But where that building lands would be in part determined locally. And the state will only subsidize. The state will buy the property, but only at the appraised value. So that is a consideration if the school unit insists on we want it here versus here, and the asking rate is higher than the appraisal, then locally the SAU may decide that they'd be willing to bear that as part of local cost. She gave some other examples, additional gymnasium square footage, and Stu often talks about that. So in an elementary project, in elementary schools, the state will not fund bleachers because it is purely a learning space. But oftentimes people are willing and wanting and expecting that those gymnasiums have capacity for spectators and events. So those are some examples of consideration that would raise a local-only portion and add it to the total cost of the project. So that's it. That's a bit of the history, and you have the recommendation of the building committee. I don't know if anyone else on the building committee would like to add to the conversation. We do know and recognize that community schools, particularly in rural areas, are the heart of the community. And comparatively nationally, this is rural land right here, but we understand and feel, what people feel in the value of the small community schools and trying to balance what that provides to families with the cost of operating such aging facilities. One of the concerns and common concerns are, transportation and bus routes, and we have geographically a pretty large, far-flung community. And one of the things that we might be able to do, however this sorts out to be, or for a final project, is looking at the bus routes. I mean, some of the concerns can be addressed and solved, but we're just looking for some authorization and direction to just start to explore what those are. And we will continue, as you said, with community engagement, the ed specifications. If anyone's interested in, maybe we can add this link to the site. If you go to the DOE site on major capital improvement, you will have before you 3 links to the very extensive planning documents that the department requires in this process. But it's abundantly clear all the way through this process that the educational specifications is central. They are central to what our need is. And I'm going to link to the banner page here. And one thing that we've been able to solve, I, along with the Fairfield board members, participated, and we were invited to a Fairfield Town Council meeting last Wednesday, and talked about, similar to what we talked about today, but what was asked of us is could we update that timeline? So the DOE has this 21-step PDF that we're not able, if you try to expand it and look at it, you lose the resolution in it. So CHA has laid out just a general timeline of all the steps toward construction, actually to occupying a building. And we are looking at best 4 years from now, and a year and a half or so out from any groundbreaking, and certainly a year from June from a referendum to move forward with the concept. There are a couple straw polls that need to occur that address site selection. So those are formatted much like our budget meetings when we're able to have them in public. Will there be a vote on site selection? There'll be a vote on concept design before it goes to the referendum. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. So again, I'm sorry. Any other committee members wanting to contribute?
Does anyone else have a question? Seeing none, all those in favor? Okay. All those opposed? 2. And all those abstained? 1. The motion carries. Again, this is to authorize and direct the building committee to proceed with consolidated school construction project options. And this is to see and to move forward with the educational specs committee and also site selection, correct? Yes. Okay, all right, thank you. Moving on, new business, resignations, there are none. Appointments. Is there a motion to approve Lisa Sherwood as a district custodian as her 90-day probation period is complete? Moved by Jenny, seconded by Heather, to approve Lisa Sherwood as district custodian as her 90-day probation period No, no, that's okay. That's right. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? 13. 0, 0. Committee reports.
Again, under the Finance Committee report, we met again for a second meeting this month, earlier this evening, to review the changes that we had asked about at a previous meeting, from the first meeting of March. So what the administration has brought forward to us is a reduction of the anthem, the projected anthem increase. We had been including it at a 10% increase, which is where we had started the budget process for the last couple of years. We reduced that down to 5. That results in a savings or a reduction to the budget proposal of about $212,000. We still do not have an official number from Anthem, and we won't have an official number from Anthem probably until April 5th. So it's likely that we will hold a special meeting on April 8th to be able to finalize the budget, because this is such a significant portion of our budget. But a couple of other items, there were a number of positions that we were able to move to federal funding, two nurse positions and a custodian position that were able to be utilize federal funding next year rather than general operating funds. And again, I just want to reiterate that that's a one-time solution, that eventually we'll want to pull those back to the general fund when those federal funds expire. So we'll need to think about how to do that in a way that doesn't create a huge cliff for us. Maybe we bring them back one next year and one following year. But we do want to be cognizant of that while trying to mitigate as much of the impact on this year's budget that we are pushing a little bit of this down the road. So what the bottom line right now is a $125,000 increase in the proposed budget, which is 0.4%. The budget report doesn't even actually show a percent increase because it doesn't round up to 0.01. So I do want to commend the administration for thinking creatively of ways to move some of the expenses to other funds. However, I want to caution people that we still are receiving a significant amount less from the state next year than we are this year, to the tune of about $900,000. So even with an almost flat budget, there would be an increase to the local share. And right now it's 0.94 to 1.4 mils is the impact. So we are still exploring what other savings we can put in. We are currently involved in bargaining, so that plays a factor. We are waiting for, again, the health insurance information, which, if that came in flat, then that would be $200,000 that we could reduce from the budget. That would be significant. So this is still a work in progress, but it is actively being worked by Mrs. Herson in the business office. That's all.
Thank you, Jenny. Policy?
So the policy committee met tonight to talk about curriculum requirements and how they will look with the expectation of increasing the number of charts required, which will
Thank you. I'll just begin with some good news. We have set up a vaccine clinic for our staff. Thank you to Shane Savage and Fairfield Pharmacy. He is able to provide our employees with, we had 150 doses allotted to the district. Met with him a few times. He's going to be in the high school foyer tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock to set up for the clinic. Our nurses are going to assist in his staff and vaccinate those who are interested in receiving. We do have enough doses to meet the needs of those who express an interest. And we have many staff who have found other avenues to access that. I'm not sure what that number is, or do I need to know, but I'm just very grateful that he's persisted through this. And we've also invited Kennebec Montessori, because I got a final count that we had some availability for them, so their staff are able to access that. So thank you to Shane Savage. And one of the ways that this has worked, it starts at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, is that we have an in-service day. So our drivers, our support staff, food service, everyone is freed up to access at the same time, because that would have been a little bit of a challenge. And likely the follow-up 4 weeks from now will probably be scheduled for a Saturday, so we don't disrupt school and give people access. One of the other issues or concerns that we've been hearing from families about, and I've received an email from a parent in the community, and I know board members have received this, and it is in the media, particularly, I would say, more prominently in the southern part of the state. But when are we going to have a full return to school, full return to in-person learning for all students? And it is certainly something that we continue to talk about. And this idea of vaccine availability for staff is one of the steps forward out of what we're in right now, certainly. But one thing that hasn't changed, and maybe there's a bit of confusion on this, is the distancing required to maintain among children and now among people. So when we opened school up and made our plan for an opening in July, we were measuring those spaces in the classroom to keep the students 6 feet away from the adults and to keep the students 3 feet apart and maintain that in the classroom setting with masking in place. And the other context is cafeteria, where students are unmasked where they're eating and they need to maintain 6 feet apart in that context. Those two variables have not changed at all, nor is it changed for busing and maintaining the 3 feet apart, with the exception of families who can sit near each other. So Tuesday morning, I had asked our building principals, and I had a conversation with Scott also, with this change in the distance between adults and children, would that give us some capacity to fully reopen? And I heard back from each of the principals individually, and no, it might provide a little more space in a room for a student, potentially. We did our best in cleaning out all peripheral furniture, and I'm sure teachers felt that, to maximize every square inch in those rooms. But we are not able to bring everyone back to capacity. So some of the numbers that people may look at, and looking at the blue or the gray cohorts, are the students who are in red, the fully remote. And at no time did this district communicate to families that was a commitment, a year-long commitment. And I use the word in the communication, irrevocable. In fact, we have done the opposite of that. And the principals and staff have worked to try to connect with families and encourage them, if they are able to and feel comfortable, to at least a hybrid every other day return. Because in actuality, I think the teachers are more confident when students are physically present. And it's probably a better educational experience for them, mostly. I think families are struggling with a hybrid for a whole host of reasons, and so are children, and we certainly acknowledge that. But right now, there is nothing that I am aware of the guidelines or any in the path forward. When I'm hearing the phrases in the foreseeable future, and I've heard from DOE and the main CDC. In fact, I received a call from the epidemiologist that I've been working with through this. And usually she's calling to give me a heads up on a case that might be breaking, but she called to offer herself as a resource if the board would wish to speak to her or any other group that we have in regard to what these changes mean and what is immovable right now, and it is that social distancing. I know that the Department of Education is planning and working hard to communicate to school units as soon as possible what that fall scenario might look like, and that's months away, speculating out. But certainly we are doing our best to make this work. So again, we are complying with what the guidelines allow for to the capacity that we can. One of the other questions or concerns noted is the loss of learning or learning recovery, as I heard it phrased, and our plan for that. And we know certainly that the educational experience is not at all the same as it would be if it were 5 days in person. We are aware and we are required by the department in their framework to have a plan for closing that gap in learning loss, and we have set down that path to do it. In part, we're utilizing the NWEA to get 3 screeners in the school year for staff to get a gauge on student progress in a more formative way, and certainly the daily assessments, the informative assessments that teachers are doing. There is an advantage to smaller groups, but again, in the case of the curriculum and the programming, we know that we will have to make an effort to bring children up to where they would be in a normal environment. One of the needs expressed by staff in the buildings and administrators, and a need that we're attempting to address with the federal money, is that learning loss or a plan for learning recovery. And one of the projects just filed, and we filed the SRT today, is a plan for an extended school day, extended school year, in a way to finance that, in hiring staff for grades 7 through 12, and we have some structures in place for that. And also we have Title I federal monies for our summer learning program in the elementary schools, and we received over $60,000 for that. Typically, we have a Title I summer learning program for children first, second grade, and it is a far more limited group because we are school-wide. Title I programming is in place in Benton, Albion, and Clinton. All students are eligible. We don't have any eligibility requirements around demographic information. So we intend to have some summer programming up through grade 6. We're going to provide transportation for that. In the secondary, particularly high school, we're looking at a plan for credit recovery. We were talking in policy earlier about academic standing in, the expectation that a student completes the program and graduates after 4 years of high school. And certainly our high school administration, our teachers, our guidance staff are aware that students are in jeopardy in some of those core classes and earning credits on pace with graduating on time within 4 years. So we intend to offer credit recovery opportunity this spring, and again this fall for the semester structure of the high school. So two-year cycles of spring and fall credit recovery. We're hiring teachers in core content areas to begin with. And in grades 7 and 8, similar, but they will be year-long courses. So if I could just share with you, if you're so inclined, our SO2 project, we have $200,000 targeted for supplemental programming before and after extended school day, extended school year, excuse me. Mental health services, right now, so we have a social worker employed at the high school as part of our general fund staff. We have contracted with Maine Behavioral Health in the elementary schools who bill out by client, but we have added $21,000 to this project in ESSER 2 to capture those who might not be insured and allow the school to connect families with that resource without paying for the service out of our general fund. We have, as Jenny mentioned, we have moved 2 nursing positions out of the general fund into an ESSER project for 2 years. Is our hope that we'll build back, step back up, and say a year from now, because it is one-time money. But we have dedicated $314,419 to that project. District Technology Integration Specialist for 2 years, $104,000, and that was a reduction in a part-time teaching position. Ingenuity, which is web-based credit recovery software, $52,500 for high school use. Additional student devices, $50,000, and other costs removed from our local budget. This district, as I mentioned at the finance meeting, was in good standing for remote in this way, that we have one-to-one computing. The board had committed to that several years ago. And every year in our budget, we have the replacement of freshman devices because students are issued a device their freshman year and they leave with a device their senior year. NWEA, so the state has moved to offer or require or utilize that tool for the state assessment, but this district is already using that, and the 3 screens that are available and all the data that is available with that to inform instruction. We took that cost out of our budget and built in $70,000 to pay for that over the next 2 years. Additional staff, teacher support. By the end of this year, I believe we will spend, when we say additional staff, we're talking, substitute teachers among them, but it's in many ways how we've been able to remain open and also not have teachers losing planning time to cover for those who are not able to be at work. So in this project, we have $300,000 dedicated to that cost. The custodial position that we removed from the general fund, we have dedicated for the next 2 years, $126,857 for that position. An additional $50,000 for overtime worked by operations maintenance. And that leaves 1.5 million for ventilation. Siemens finally came in this week. Scott met with them and went over their estimate for the upgrade of the Lawrence Complex in Benton, and their quote came in at 3.2 million with all the projects. So we have prioritized, and we'll hopefully be able to utilize the third round of MSAD funds to finance the remainder of that. And again, when we received the award, we did not expect at the time that we'd be funding positions that were seated in the general fund. But in our efforts to bring down our budget, our costs, we're fortunate that we have these resources available. Does anyone have any questions about anything that I've covered? Okay, so before we move to the next part of the agenda, I've asked David Packard to be here to talk about athletics in the spring. And maybe once you're through that, could you share a little bit about the grant that you're submitting for middle school fitness? Thank you.
Last week, the state groups met with the MTA, and they returned the state so that we will be able to play for state championships, regular schedules this spring, which of course creates some more things. Spectators are allowed to return now in the spring through the governor's latest executive order to be able to accommodate those. One of the things that we do have to do now is to screen parents on the daily questionnaires. That to send something out to them is very difficult. So what I have done is created a form that I will put in poster form at each venue this spring. This is based on the CDC questions that they had out on Tuesday. Of course, by the time I actually get the sign, I'll probably have new ones out. But I have closed it on the bottom of it, and it said, if you answered yes to any of these questions, please do not attend and help keep our kids and our community safe. Thank you. So hopefully by doing that, we're trying to create an environment that we're looking out for our kids. And I, at this time, would also like to commend our kids for all of the precautions they have taken. We've had kids that missed a couple of days, but it wasn't because of athletics. It's because of things in the classroom or things that happened away from school. So we've gone through 2 seasons without having any kids miss any time from what has been passed on, which is amazing. You see what some of the other schools have had to do. So, it's a commendation to our students. Some of the other things that we need to look to do is to have clear direction. All CDC things are still in place, so parents will have to wear masks, parents will have to social distance. There'll be setups for bench areas that need to be expanded, so we'll have to put caution tape up and around that, do everything we can to keep the spectators away from the students in these situations. Schedules are still not set. We are finalizing those now. They again will be playing as close to schools as through our proximity as we can, and to cut down on transportation. We're going to try to limit one event a night. Like we will not have a softball game and a track meet going on at the same time, because that would just create way too much congestion in that area. So we'll limit things, we'll schedule them out. We've already decided that lacrosse game, we played under the lights at night to help that situation, and we want people to come and support, but we also want to try to keep them as spread out as we possibly can. And then again, we'll have hand washing stations all over the place for people to use. At the athletic events, we've already started about putting them in the dugouts that the kids will have. The automatic ones will be at all the events, different track meets. So we're hopefully covering that there. As far as transportation, Scott has not a thought that it is going to be a struggle, but we've come up with plans where baseball team, softball team will do batting practice here, get on a bus at 3:30 and go play Winslow at 4 o'clock or wherever it is that they're going. So there's things that we have been able to do that will certainly allow our kids to participate in the regular spring season. And that was what our goal was from the start. Any questions? Mr. Thurston also asked me to speak real quickly. We did have an opportunity for it's kind of a grant, but they call it a gift, and I think gifts are better than grants. So it is for the junior high facility. They are going to reward 3 $100,000 gifts to schools to buy fitness equipment. And I submitted our application today, and we will know in June how we made out. And I've been speaking with Mr. Boyd, who said the worst thing that can happen is they say no. So, but if we do that, it'll give our junior high kids some really good equipment to have and be proud of and go from there.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Packard. Moving on to other business. Conflict of interest statement, information only. Danielle, literacy volunteer, Marvel, and Friends of Messalonsky, Watershed, Billy Joe, Brown Woods, Interview Kickstart, LLC, and Misty Brook Organic Farm, Jenny Boyden, State of Maine, Neil Calvary, Calvary Farms, LLC, Ray Davis Folsom, Waterville Public Schools, Katrina Dumar, Personalities, Hairstyles, Beth Lambert, State of Maine, Roy White, Pools, Plumbing and Heating, Sarah Williams of Vangrid. Again, moving on, the 2021 co-curricular directors, advisors, and coaches, no motion is necessary. We are going to admit the baseball grade 7. That person is unable to fulfill that position at this moment in time. So baseball grade 8, Stan Trombley. Softball grade 8, Greg Chesley. Softball grade 7, Joe Higgins. Junior high head track, Robert Morrison. Junior high assistant track, Sue Morris. Baseball varsity, Rusty Mercier. Baseball JV, John Hersom. Softball varsity, Joey Marcoux. Softball JV, David Bayou. Lacrosse boys, Daniel Brandon. High school head track, Tim Alberts. High school track assistant, Peter Spears, Thomas Hebert, and Nancy Weiss. Do I have a motion to go into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA Section 405, 6A to discuss contract negotiations? Okay. It's been moved by Katrina, seconded by Neil to go into executive sessions pursuant to